you sometimes represent children themselves.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
That's got to be really tough.
It is.
Do you have to take into account what the child wants? And what happens if what the child wants is, in your view, contrary to their best interests?
It's really difficult because when we're working with children, where I am, we work with children that are part of the child protection system. And in our role, children over 10 that come to us for assistance or they're referred to us, we have to act on their direct instructions, which means they could say they want to go home to dad, even though dad has just been charged with, involuntary manslaughter of mum, and then there's a history of family violence and dad's just not appropriate for them to go back to. That is something we have to provide to the courts, information we have to provide. We can be very clear and discuss sort of options with a child about what's likely to happen. And it's not until the very end where the child's wishes are sort of taken into account, but they're not taken as gospel by the court. The court decides at the end anyway if people can't agree on anything. So I find that hard because my job isn't to be a social worker. My job's obviously to give them all the information, give them advice on what's likely to happen with the case and what court order's likely to be made. But it's really hard for me because I think I can't help but be somewhat maternal and want to be helping them more than what I should be. But it is hard at those times. You've got to remind yourself you're not a social worker. You're not there to support their family with, the various issues and put supports in place for them. You're there to essentially guide them through the court process. And
are you simply not allowed to allow your personal views on the matter to get involved at all?
Yeah.
So if you have a private conversation with a judge, you can't bring that up?
So it depends on what context. So the work we do is we're working with children that we act on their direct instructions. You can be appointed to act on a child's best interests, which is different, which is where you can express the child's view, but then ultimately put forward what you think is best for them. So you need specific training in that. I'm trained in that, and it's not as often we get those cases coming through just with our work, but in family law generally, it is quite big. There are a lot of independent children's lawyers appointed, which that's their job. So it's hard for me when I'm working with some kids on their instructions and I have to just put forward what they want. And it's hard when I'm acting in their best interests as well, for different children, and it's hard for me because I have to remember my role because it's different for each kid that I'm helping.
Right.
So, and it's just natural as adults for us to want to, feel passionate about things and want to put forward what we think's best. But when you're acting for them, I suppose in that respect where it's just their instructions, you put forward what they want and you take them through the process, that I find hard because sometimes I just think, I would not think that this was appropriate at all. But and then when you're talking to the courts too, you have to make that really clear because you have to be, I suppose, upfront about what the child does know in a sense. They are aware that this is the situation, but this is what they want. But then sometimes the child might not know the whole history. They may not know every little detail.
But you know these details?
Yeah.
Are you allowed to tell the child?
If they're obviously written down, it's reported, it's something you can, but I take a lot of care because you just don't want to traumatize kids and expose them to the court process. You try to take a step back and think of information that they need to know and information that the adults need to know. It really is a case-by-case kind of thing. So I suppose if a parent was charged and I suppose in custody, it's pretty clear that they're locked up. So you can go into a bit more detail with a child of what's gone on. You don't have to be graphic with them, but you can go into a bit more detail. It just depends. Each case depends.
Sure. So let's take the example you gave. The father is, alleged to have committed manslaughter against the child's mother. The child still wants to go and live with the father. Do you, in those meetings with the kid, ever gently suggest, hey, are you sure? How would those conversations go?
It's really, so talking to kids is something that it's not a skill, I suppose. Personally, I don't think it can be taught. Some people have it and some people don't in these situations. You either, And you don't, no one teaches you either as like to how to talk to them, how to put this information out. So when you're in the moment with them, and you'll know, I suppose, for me, if dad's brought up what dad's done or what, I'll just mention dad softly. Like you just mention, have you seen him or spoken to him? Has anyone helped you to call dad, obviously at the prison or at the remand centre? Do you know why he's there? And it just depends on age and the situation. If you've got a child that's crying and is really vulnerable and isn't giving you anything, probably not a good time.
Right.
But if you have a curious 14-year-old who's very aware of the issues and grew up a bit too quickly, then you can talk to them differently and you can be a bit more upfront. You should inform them of the information because that'll just, I suppose, inform their instructions to you. They're going to have a clearer mind, but we have to be really careful. Usually a lot of the time child protection are in the background and the workers will help us to get that information out. Plus they're doing, a lot of the time they're linked in with counsellors, so the counsellors will assist with that. It just, depends on age, child circumstances.
When you meet with a minor, is somebody else present, a social worker? So you
not allowed.
Okay.
So lawyers, obviously it's a confidentiality aspect, it's an ethical issue. We meet with children alone. So we might meet with them at their school or in a public setting, or we'll ask them to come to our office. Although our office is an inviting space, I still feel a bit awkward having children come to a lawyer's office because it's, quite intimidating, uncomfortable. I try and go somewhere where it's comfortable for them. So unless the child wants someone present and they give me authority for them to be there to listen to what we're discussing, it's a no. I would prefer not to have them present. If we, sometimes I'll act for siblings. So there might be 2 or 3 children in one family that I'll work with all of them, and I would still speak with them individually because their views could be, I suppose, tampered with if they're all in the room at the same time. The eldest might dominate the other 2. You've got to be so careful. But yeah, if it's someone from my team, they can come in with us because we're all from the same organisation. But yeah, I tend to keep others out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about kids under 10, or if you have to represent an infant? You just have more, I guess, authority in how you represent them in court?
Kids under 10 in the child protection space, we act for them on their best interests, which means that we have not free reign, but we kind of do with the court system to express what we think's best. So, of course, depending on their age and their circumstances, we can speak to them and understand their view, but that's not what we go with when we go into the courtroom. We would be explaining what we think's best based on what information we have. To give you an example of, someone we'd act for under 10 would be a child with severe an intellectual disability, ADHD, autism, an array of behavioural issues, someone who's not able to give clear instructions, someone who's been traumatised by the process already, someone who's been, it's allegedly a victim of family violence, someone that is really vulnerable, that is not going to be giving clear, direct instructions of what they want. Right. So that's sort of where we get it from. It's not as often because most of the time kids are able to give us a clear idea of what they want. So, but it does happen.
But when it does happen, it's probably when you are dealing with a kid that you're able to represent based on your own preferences or your own point of view in terms of what's best for the kids, that's got to be preferential, right?
For me, I prefer that work where I'm acting on their best interests, not because I think I know better than them. It's just you do have that ability to at least you can give the court their view, but also be an independent person in all of this. You're not working with mum, you're not working with dad, you're not tied to anyone but that child. So you've got their, I suppose, best interests at the forefront of your mind, which if you're acting for a parent, you're there to advocate for the parent and what they want. But that's why I prefer it. It's just to really work and advocate for kids. Yeah. Sometimes kids don't know what they actually need.
Well, you said not that you know better than the kid, but just from my perspective, someone who's incredibly ignorant in this whole field, but how could you not know better? Like a 10-year-old kid that's so young to be making their own choice, because often there's so much pressure on them to say they want to stay with one of their parents when it's really contrary to their interests. And there's probably pressure coming from the family, and it just doesn't seem like a great idea. Like 10 is so young.
It's really hard. So I found the best work I've done is with teenagers, you know, those that probably 14 and up. They're very clear on what they want. They've seen everything. They still influenced, but not as much. 10-year-old, I'd never speak to. I don't like speaking to them on the phone. I like to see them, see what's going on. And the way I speak to them is different to a 15-year-old kid.
Right.
And I think the questions you ask are really basic. Just, you know, how's everything going? And have you spoken to dad or seen mum? You know, and it's really hard for me as well for a 10-year-old to explain what a lawyer is, because you've got to explain your job. And it's how sad it is to know that a lot of 10-year-olds say, yeah, I know what a lawyer is. Like, I know what a court is, and that's not because of the TV, that's because of their family history.
Right.
So that's
not their first rodeo.
Yeah. So look, for 10, it's just, no, I've been there. I've been there with mum before, like just for family violence type stuff. They've been at courts before, and it's really difficult.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can imagine.